So, welcome everyone. This is our exponential talk here in Davos at the World Economic Forum. And I'm happy to be here with Dr. Johan Rockström, leading scientist in climate and behind the planetary boundaries. So welcome, Johan. Great to have you here.
Yeah, great to see you.
Yes. And I'm Johan Falk, I'm CEO and co-founder of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. We bring together leading companies with this common mission to halve emissions close to 2030 through exponential climate action and solutions. And we provide a framework for companies called the Exponential Business Playbook for companies to accelerate transformation and contribute to the global transformation. So Johan, how has the week been so far? Hectic week?
Well, actually, it's in the midst of all the turbulence and geopolitical challenges, and also the tendencies of, having headwinds in terms of the transformation, not least exponential roadmap pathways towards a safe landing on energy, but also on all planetary boundaries. It's been quite reassuring so far here in Davos. We've had a plenary for the first time, actually, within the official program on prosperity within planetary boundaries. A really well-curated session with, I provided the science and the update on the latest planetary health check analysis. We can come back to that. But what was most interesting is that then you have a panel with really heavyweight CEOs like Andrew Forrest and Suneet from Renew, and talking of the alignment with science and how that drives innovation, and that we are on exponential pathways away from fossil fuel dependent and linear resource use in industries. And this was at a planetary level. I feel in general that it's quite reassuring to see, again, in the midst of a tendency towards more short-termism, nationalism, that the discussions here, at least, focus very much on recognizing the global commons and recognizing that the world economy is at risk of slowing down if we do not integrate fully the resilience and the stability of all the environmental components that regulates the state of the planet. So it's a kind of a counterforce, let's say a sanity check, but it's also a counterforce to a lot of the noise we see in media. Actually, my view is quite strong here that I think we have a huge disconnect between the way media is portraying the mess in the world and the realities on the ground. I think we haven't deviated so far away from a pathway, an inevitable pathway away from fossil fuel-based driven economy. We are at the beginning of the end of that. We're in the midst of the transition. And then suddenly comes all this noise that gives this impression that we're pulling brakes. Of course, there are headwinds, and companies across the world are facing them. But I think it's more likely to be a sign that we're in the midst of a transition which is unstoppable, rather than being some form of pause button or stop button. And Davos here so far, I think, confirms that position.
So I think that's important to state, that it's still part of the general program, and the activity is very strong, and a high number of actors stay on course. So that is essential, I think. But to talk briefly a little bit about the science, state of the science, because the carbon law, which I also think was a birth of the Exponential Roadmap, the Exponential Roadmap Initiative at around 2017, so that we need to halve emissions by 2030. And now we know, and every decade, while protecting nature and carbon sinks. And now we are about 5 years ahead, even if we see signs that we might be close to bending the curve. But can you give a short update on state of science? Because I assume it's a race between the solution scaling versus the risk for irreversible tipping points.
No, you're right, and this is the deep concern that, and it is actually not. It's very appropriate to reference back to when we launched the carbon law, because what the carbon law suggested was giving the world a scientifically aligned pathway for an orderly phase out that could, with a very high chance, keep pace with a realistic rate of innovation and scaling of solutions by starting to bend the global curve of emissions in 2020, cut the emissions by half from 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year to 20 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year over a decade, and to reach that point, and that would mean that we would be virtually on an unstoppable pathway towards a zero carbon world economy by 2050. Now, unfortunately, we're here, January 2026, and we're not making progress. We're actually continuing to increase emissions, and this, of course, translates to an even faster requirement. So the curve now, to have a chance of holding the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit boundary, is even steeper. Actually, at COP13 Belém, we were very clear that now we are at a point that even if we bend the curve of emissions 2026, we will have to, at the global level, reduce emissions by at least 5% per year to be able to have any chance of limiting overshoot, which we are inevitably moving into. The latest data shows that within 5 years, we'll be breaching 1.5 degrees Celsius. And our task now is to minimize overshoot and come back to 1.5 at best by the end of this century. But that is just one point of the broader challenge we're facing, because 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries are now breached. It's ocean, it's biosphere integrity, it's land, it's fresh water, it's climate, it's novel entities, and it's overloading of nitrogen and phosphorus. And even if we focus in only on the climate transition, we know that all of these breaching points on the living biosphere is undermining the climate system, because they're hitting back on the climate system. And this is what worries me most today, that the data starts showing 2 things. One is that the warming is accelerating. And we cannot fully explain it, but the rate of warming is going faster than we had anticipated, despite the fact that you're right, that the curve of emission is gradually at least leveling out. So it's not us causing it alone through emission of greenhouse gases. There's something else going on. And very likely it is a combination of boundaries being breached. It is aerosol loading, it is carbon uptake capacity on land starting to show signs of reduction, particularly in rainforest and temperate forest and boreal forest. We see, unfortunately, a tendency of a darkening planet. Albedo is changing, more heat is absorbed because of ice melt, because of changes in ecosystems. So all of this suggests that we're really running out of time, because the Earth system is losing resilience because of the breaching of boundaries, and we're not yet bending the curve, which of course gives even more support to the Exponential Roadmap Initiative work, that we need to, that the only chance we have to have a manageable future is by speeding up the scaling and the innovation pathways. And the good news in that little sliver of, let's say, is there a light in the tunnel? Well, the answer is yes, on 2 fronts. I mean, one is that the scientific evidence shows that we're very close to tipping points. We're very close to having a point where we have self-reinforced warming because of multiple tipping points. We may come back to that. But we're not there yet. The window is still open to turn this around, but it has to go very, very fast. We're talking years, not decades, to be able to veer off. And the second piece of evidence there, of course, which is linked to the Exponential Roadmap, is that we know that this is not a utopian plan to succeed. The solutions are there. It is possible to take us to a decarbonized economy and to bring us back within the safe space on the biosphere boundaries through technologies that we have at hand today.
And even when we did the first Exponential Roadmap around 2017, we stated we had the solutions to take us to the first halving, and I would even claim that we now have the solutions to take us to the second halving. So it have developed incredibly fast. And if you look at the underestimating as well, of course, the renewable energy transformation has been continuously underestimated by society. But I think we had a pretty good pathway, even the roadmap, in terms of the exponential trajectories. So if you just look at renewable energy, an absolute majority of the investments is done in renewable energy. The issue is, of course, that the world still need more energy, so we haven't really seen the deep cuts. But in electrical vehicles as well, of course, we are at 20-25% of new sales, and I think we can hit 90% around 2030, 2035. So it's been continuously underestimated. But do you like to comment on that? And also that we need to direct, of course, now AI in the direction, as far as we see it, to actually accelerate these solutions, which is also very quite untapped opportunity.
No, you're right. I mean, that's why we are in a quite contradictory position right now. That on the one hand, we have a planetary crisis on our watch, and it's not somewhere in the future, it's now. Secondly, we need to respect finite budgets, and these finite budgets is the carbon budget, the nitrogen budget, the phosphorus budget, and so on. And the third is that, yes, we do have these positive indications that, for example, as you state, I totally confirm that. I mean, both India and China, 2025 has actually a reduction of coal extraction and coal burning, thanks to the transition towards electrification or pace of electrification and also renewable energy. The dilemma is that so far, renewable energy is only meeting rising energy demand. It's not reducing fossil fuel use. Globally, we are basically still increasing the use of coal, oil and gas, even though at a slower pace. So that's why at COP30 in Belém, we were very clear that the roadmap to accelerate the phase out of fossil fuels has to combine both exponential investments and developments of renewable energy, but also regulatory means to help economies to phase out and shut down coal, oil and gas. And this is, here we're failing so far. We're actually, in that sense, in a dilemma. I mean, yes, we have several economies and many sectors that actually are proving absolute decoupling and the ability to truly reduce emissions thanks to investments in renewable energy. But overall, that is not happening. Overall, we're still kind of adding more fossil fuels to the mix. And this simply needs to stop urgently to have a chance of that kind of veering off from unmanageable outcomes.
And one, connecting to that, to the decoupling, one report we launched called Crocodile Economics shows that, in our view, that there is a sign where there is an opportunity both for countries as well as for companies to drive up or keep GDP and revenues and prosperity while starting to drive down emissions, like the crocodile jaws, thereby the crocodile terminology. So we saw that now with 49 countries of that particular decoupling. This has, in our study, primarily been driven by the energy transformation so far and energy efficiency, and to some extent vehicles. And we see the same pattern for leading companies. It's not the majority, but who actually can drive down emissions while increasing revenues, both in scope 1 and 2, but also in scope 3 in value chain. So there is a pattern that it is possible, but of course it's primarily cover energy. It doesn't cover the completely material transformation, as an example. But what is your reflection on that, and where do you see opportunities from that perspective?
Well, to begin with, I mean, this is a big debate also in science, but my conclusion is that there's no contradiction between economic development, even growth in certain instances, and staying within or operating within the safe space of the planetary boundaries. So we can have prosperity within planetary boundaries. I'm absolutely convinced that is possible. That said, it is complex. I mean, I'm very much in support of the Crocodile Economics report. I think what that report shows is that it is possible to achieve absolute decoupling. And I think it's really good that you've been able to, in an honest way, also try to introduce consumption-based emissions, so that it's not only the domestic emissions, but it also is the input-output flow depending on exports and imports and how consumption patterns look like. But still, when you add all those true emissions, the per capita emissions among the advanced industrial countries in the world are, between 5 and 10 gigatons of carbon per person per year, which is, a factor 10 above the sustainable levels if we are to really reach, back to a sustainable future. And I say that because the reason why, despite the crocodile economics evidence, the 40 plus countries that are actually moving in a direction of decoupling, and despite that, we're still raising emissions, which is, of course, because the large emerging economies are not decoupling. And they are producers of consumer goods which are supplied on a global economy. So it's not as simple to say that,
exactly.
Well, we can just have absolute decoupling and things are moving along in the right direction. We also need to cap, and that's your point about material flows and staying within budgets on all the components of the planetary boundaries to have any chance of making this transition adding up at that global budget level. That said, I think it's really inspiring to see that, yes, and I think these examples must come out much more prominently, that, look here, the future is a modern welfare generation which does not compromise modern welfare, good lives, while still staying within planetary boundaries. And we have so much evidence that can be achieved in a positive way. Actually, today, a sustainability transition, we have so much empirical evidence that it gives better prosperity, better jobs and economic development, better security and health, and better stability in economies. So in that sense, the whole resilience agenda is not in contradiction at all with this transition. And I think what you're showing in the crocodile economics work is supporting that. But I think it has to be also placed in that global context of the challenge we still face.
Exactly, and I also like to add that for developing countries with very low emissions per capita, they should of course primarily focus on driving prosperity and the economy, but while leapfrogging, of course, to the new technologies, which
Absolutely.
is a great opportunity. So it's not precisely the same, I think, formula for all countries, but. So to wrap up this session, Johan, what is now the importance of leadership? We work with leading companies which are, as far as I see it, staying on course, but the really importance to now drive leadership and show that we can actually combine better business with contributing to the global transformation. So what is your take on that?
I think we've probably reached the most important time in probably modern history when leadership is more important than ever, because the reason why we're facing these headwinds is very likely that we are actually in the midst of this transformation. It is challenging, it is jumping, it is a gauntlet. So now leadership is more important than ever. What can that leadership be? It's actually business leaders stepping up and being very clear that there's no contradiction between profitability, productivity, and sustainability, and that this transition is actually something that is unstoppable and it needs collective action.
Thank you.